Good afternoon and welcome to our final session of the day, bringing history to the math classroom, even if you're not an expert. Our presenter today is Beth Schaubroeck from the U.S. Air Force Academy. If you have any questions for our presenter during the session, please feel free to enter those into the chat at the bottom of the Zoom screen and we will address them at the end of the talk. And on that note, I'll hand things over to our presenter.
All right, can you give me some confirmation that I'm sharing my screen? It's all working right.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Thank
good.
you, Beth.
Awesome. Thank you. Slideshow. So I'm going to talk about bringing history to the math classroom, even if you're not an expert. I am not an expert. My email address is there. This is how much I am not an expert. I've never taken, nor have I ever taught a math history course. I made good headway on one math history book reading cover to cover. I attended a Triumphs workshop in 2016, and that was transformative for me. Like I really learned a lot. The emphasis of the Triumphs project is using primary source projects in mathematics classes. So looking at the primary source of the mathematics. So that was really cool. And I think it's fair to say that I came to my interest in the history of math mid-career. I think that's probably accurate. So why would you bring history into the math classroom? And I'm sure I haven't listed all the other reasons. I would love it if you're here at the conference, here at the session, if you have another reason for bringing in math history, that you throw it into the chat to share with everybody. In my mind, it humanizes mathematics. It's really interesting. Mathematics is not just the patterns and the, just the subject that we all like, but it's actually a human endeavor. And so, the collaboration and how people learn from each other, that's really interesting to me. It gives a way to reach students who might not be math majors, which is most of the students we teach, at least most of the students I teach. It can be a good way to connect with students of diverse backgrounds by showing mathematicians of diverse backgrounds. But, if I'm the only example of the mathematician they see, I'm right, like I might not be like them. And really for me, it's just very, very interesting. I just find it super interesting. So my approach to math history, this is what I have done to bring history into the math classroom. I've tried to distill mathematicians' biographies down to 3 or 4 bullet points, which is remarkably hard because they did a lot and there's whole books written about them usually. I also include scientists. I'm also including some 20th century mathematicians, scientists, engineers, so not all history, some contemporary. I have the slide up at the beginning of class. So when students walk in the classroom, it's usually already projecting on the board. This was great in the online environment, that awkward time when the students are walking into the classroom and, they don't really want to turn on their microphones yet. It gave them something to look at. But in person, I do this also. If possible, I try to connect the slides to course content or to current events. So because of what I've taught recently, my slides skew heavily to complex variables. Of course, you have to have Cauchy and Laurent. And differential equations, when I teach the Runge-Kutta method, you ought to know who Runge and Kutta are. Runge and Kutta, surprisingly, aren't best known for the Runge-Kutta method. They're known for a bunch of other things. That in itself is interesting. I have about 55 slides so far. I'm hoping to add more this summer, just so I can have more variety and hopefully have some more things to add. So I'm just going to give some examples. And so to let you see sort of the breadth of, the interesting mathematical history and why did I pick this person? So I've picked a very small subset of my 55 slides. Start with Brahmagupta. It's interesting to students that a lot of the earlier mathematics was in the service of astronomy. They sort of think of math as being maybe in the service of physics or maybe engineering, but they don't really think about how important astronomy was. When we talk about navigating by the stars and all of that. So it's interesting to bring in an astronomer mathematician. you have to talk about algorithm, because that's where the word algebra comes from, and they've all spent lots of time doing algebra, and where does it come from? This is one that I actually, most of the history part I got from one of the primary source projects on the Triumphs website. So you can Google search Triumphs. I don't remember if I have that included in my references at the end. So this is interesting. I also, because I teach at the Air Force Academy, Arabic is one of our languages that a lot of students study. So the students enjoy getting to try to read the Arabic, which I copied and pasted from the primary source project because I don't know Arabic. We should know who the first woman was to ever get a doctorate. That's sort of interesting. So I bring in Elena Lucrezia Cornora Piscopia, which I've probably mispronounced her name. So she started her study at the University of Padua in 1672, and she was denied a doctorate in theology because you couldn't give one of those to a woman. So she got a doctorate in philosophy and became a mathematics lecturer. So that's pretty cool. You can't teach calculus without talking about Newton and Leibniz. So of course I talk about Newton. The thing I didn't know about Newton before the pandemic was that he did a lot of his work when his university was closed for the bubonic plague. So that was fun to talk about and share with the students. They were hoping that they would do groundbreaking work, and everybody centuries from that now would know their name. Leibniz, of course. You have to talk about the history of Newton and Leibniz. And for me, it's super interesting to think about the fact that it was a source of national pride who invented the calculus. Like, what if our source of national pride came from like the best scientific discoveries? That is, I don't think necessarily true, but maybe something to aspire to. And everybody needs a publicist. So I market Emily du Châtelet as Newton's publicist. She worked with Voltaire to translate Newton's work into French. And also for the general reader. So she and Voltaire co-authored this Elements of the Philosophy of Newton, which explained Newton's work for the general reader, which is interesting to know that that was something that needed to be done, and that her translation of Newton's work into French was the only one for a long time. Have to talk about Florence Nightingale. Well, I mean, I have to talk about all of these mathematicians, right? This could show up in a data science course. This data visualization that she had, where the larger, these are, it might be small on your screen. The graph here is the months of the year and the number of deaths in the Crimean War hospital. She was working in a hospital, the number of deaths due to disease versus the number of deaths due to injury. And the deaths from wounds is the small center wedge, and the deaths to disease is the large outer wedge. So, you know, basic things like basic sanitation, cleaning, hand washing, all of that stuff was not being done, and she advocated for it. So she revolutionized healthcare, but also did it by means of data. Maria Mitchell is very interesting. She was the first American, not the first woman American, the first American to discover a comet and chart its course. She got a job at Vassar College, and she had to get the college to change their curfew for the women students because, you know, you have to study astronomy at night, and they had a curfew and weren't able to study astronomy at night. So she worked on institutional change, which is also interesting. Ramanujan, it got mentioned during Jenny's talk earlier today. I like his story because he failed out of the university because he was only passing his math classes. He wasn't passing his other classes. And so it's nice for the students to see someone who is successful in mathematics, but maybe not successful in every aspect of their life. So I think that's an interesting story. So I usually talk about that. He made amazing contributions to mathematics in his very short life. Albert Cox was the first African-American to receive a PhD in math. So this is good for African American History Month in February. It's also, we should know who our pioneers are. Sometimes I talk about him after going to the math conference where I usually go to the Cox Talbot address, and like, these are named after actual people. So we should know who they were named after. Of course, going to contemporary mathematicians, you have to talk about Andrew Wiles, because he's like maybe the one famous contemporary mathematician. The thing I like about this is that I can bring in the statement of Fermat's last theorem. Calculus students can understand. Like, there isn't an integer that x to the 20th plus y to the 20th equals z to the 20th, or any other exponent, right? So when I talk about him, I talk about, I was in graduate school when he proved Fermat's last theorem, which is also interesting. Then they're like, wow, you're old. And then I also talk about the mathematics, and I find the mathematics really interesting. I teach at the Air Force Academy, so I bring in things that are of military interest. About half of my students are going to be pilots, and they should know who invented the jet engine. It's also, Frank Whittle is also interesting because not only did he invent the jet engine, but he was denied getting into the Air Force because he wasn't tall enough. And his original designs were of no interest to the Air Force. They didn't want they didn't want the jet engine. So he patented themselves in 1930, and eventually the Air Force came around and decided that the jet engine was a good idea. Stephanie Kwolek, I love her story. I had never heard of her. Again, it's a good story of not always getting what you want. She really wanted to go to graduate school, but she didn't have the funding to go to graduate school. So she got hired by DuPont when she got her degree in chemistry. And she had also wanted to be sort of a fashion designer, but her mother discouraged her. Her mother said, no, you're too much of a perfectionist. You're gonna spend all of your time on one hem, and you're not going to make any money at it. So you should go to college and study something in the sciences, which I think is pretty cool for, if you look at, when she graduated from college in 1946, that wasn't the message that all women were being sent. But she developed Kevlar, which is used for bulletproof vests, so body armor. And then she won an achievement award for Kevlar, Lycra, and spandex. So one of my students quipped, oh, so we can thank her for bulletproof vests and yoga pants. And I said, yes, absolutely. So that was sort of fun. Tim Berners-Lee, like, I didn't know his name until I started doing this research. He invented the World Wide Web. Everybody should fact check that first statement. It's pretty bold, but it's true. And he wasn't a mathematician, and he wasn't a computer scientist. He was a physicist. He was working at CERN when he published a paper about marrying up hypertext in the internet, and he called it the World Wide Web. So I think that's super interesting. So, that's just a sampling to give you some idea of some of the slides I've developed. If you're interested in them, I would be delighted to send you the whole slideshow. It takes me a while to, depends on your concept of time. For me, I think 30 minutes to develop one slide that I'm going to use in class for 2 minutes is a long time. But I had a very happy couple of weeks during my sabbatical in fall of 2019, where I developed a whole bunch of these. And then as I would run across more names, when I taught differential equations, like I said, I needed Runge-Kutta, I needed Lagrange, I need just the names that show up in our math classes. I wanted a slide of that person. So I've tried to get photos and pictures that are in the public domain, but I don't think I've been completely successful, which is why I don't have them posted on a public website. My goal was to do a really thorough scrub and to contact the people who have used pictures of that weren't in the public domain already. I haven't done that. I include my sources on every slide, if I have my students write, I want them to tell where their sources are. So I should model that behavior, even if I don't have them write, they're going to write in some other class and they're going to be expected to cite their sources. So I try to model that. The students seem to like it. I get a lot of head nods. I have no data. I don't have any like solid data to back this up, but they seem to like it. They ask follow-on questions, right? Why did she only live to age 41? What do you, since I start class with this, my students assume that I know things. And so very often they ask me, what do you know about? And then they say something. And I usually say, I don't know, let's learn, right? Let's research it. And we research it right then, pull up Google and, you know, go to the Mac Tutor History and Math website if it's a historical topic. I had a student ask who were my favorite 5 mathematicians of all time. Now, if I was going to be honest, I think he was trying to derail me from doing calculus. But it was a great question. What a great way to try. Like, I answered with a couple mathematicians, but I said, I haven't really thought about my favorite 5. Like Jenny in her talk earlier when she said, I don't have a favorite combinatorial identity. But mostly it makes me happy. Like I enjoy these stories. These are very human stories. They're very interesting and the students see that. And so if they know that I'm enthusiastic about mathematics, hopefully they'll be enthusiastic about mathematics. Here are sources I used a lot, and give me a moment. I will copy and paste this slide or copy and paste this information into the chat. The Mac Tutor History of Mathematics is great. I discovered Wikimedia Commons, which I didn't really know existed before I started doing this. The couple of books I picked, honestly, I picked them for convenience. They were either in the public library or the Air Force Academy library. I think the Headstrong one is in the Pikes Peak Public Library if you're in the Colorado Springs area. The Mathematicians of the African Diaspora, they have a new website. The old website on my slides still gets you there, but I'm not sure for how much longer. So I have to go update any slide that references it. Science History Institute. I tried to go for nonprofit places so that they could be reliable. Because I had picked a bunch of people from these couple of books about women, I realized that my slides were skewed more toward women than men. So I tried to diversify. So I went to the Nobel Prize because there's a bunch of people who didn't win the Nobel Prize because they were women. But there's also a bunch of Nobel Prize winners that are very interesting. So that got me some of the more current scientists and mathematicians. And I bought the AMS Page-A-Day calendar. It still exists. It doesn't have days of the week on it. So you can go to the AMS bookstore and buy it. And I can't get like a full slide of information out of it, but I use it for inspiration a lot. There's a bunch of people that I have a long list of, you know, who are my next biographies to write up. And, you know, usually there's, you know, so-and-so was born on this day. So that's where that came from. Here are other sources. Oops, I'm not clicking in the right window. Here are other sources that I know about, but haven't used as much. It's an MAA conference, I should mention, the MAA website. The next two I haven't used as much because I was more focused on historical figures, but if you're trying to pull contemporary people into the classroom. And then the last one on this screen, this Scientist Spotlight. The Scientist Spotlight, I just learned about it yesterday, where it's a database of information about people with a link to their biography and also a link to their whatever science or mathematics that they have done. And if you have other sources, I see a couple showing up in the meeting chat. I haven't been reading the meeting chat, so I will in a minute. I'll look in the meeting chat in a minute and say aloud the other sources that people have mentioned. But that's all I have. what questions or comments or thoughts do you have? I'm looking away from the camera, but I'm paying attention.
Thank you, Beth. That was amazing. I always think to include something like that, but never actually pull the trigger. So I will do a little bit better, because especially when you teach linear algebra and things like that, and you talk about Cramer's rule and
Yeah.
Jordan, it makes sense to tell them really who those people were. So thank you for the encouragement.
Oh, thank you. And I'll just type in because to email me, you have to be able to spell Schaubroeck, which is a challenge. I'm typing in my email address. So like I said, if you want the whole slide deck, I can find a way to share it with you. It's probably too big to mail because it has pictures. But it's yeah, I'm happy to share. And I agree with you, Mona. I had been wanting to do this for years. And it was really like having the time on sabbatical where I didn't have the pressure of having to prepare to teach tomorrow, when I had time to really get started. And I've really added, 5 or 6 since then.
All right, well, we are out of time, but thank you, Beth, so much. That was an incredibly engaging presentation, and there was a lot of engagement in the chat. So it really seems like you spoke to a lot of people here. So thank you so much. Now that wraps up our first day of the annual Rocky Mountain section of the Mathematical Association American meeting. There will now be a social hour for faculty and a social hour for students. You can view the chat and session meeting room links. I'll go ahead and send those now. You can also check the conference website for a complete list of tomorrow's sessions and their descriptions. While accessing the conference website, don't forget to swing by the virtual booth, say hello to the Hawks team, do a quick 5-minute demonstration, and you'll be entered to win a $50 Amazon gift card. Hope you all have a great evening, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Joanna. And just a quick reminder to everybody, we have a social hour at 5 o'clock. So if you want to grab coffee, beer, drinks, whatever you like to have at 5 o'clock, come and join us and we can chat and feel like we at least get a chance to talk to each other. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll leave this open just another moment or two so you can get those links if you do want to join.